Not too long ago, I was taking a walk in Newark, and as I stopped to watch this new building being erected, I was taken over with an amount of pride that we're rejuvenating the city of Newark and bringing it back to its once vibrant and welcoming self. But at the same time, I was struck by this idea that we continue to focus on strategies that are about luring in external inputs like outside developers or white collar corporate jobs. And that's keeping us on this treadmill of dependence rather than building internal strength by utilizing our local resources as much as we can. And so as I kept walking and kind of leaving the downtown core behind me, I was thinking the city of Newark is so rich in an incredibly important and yet vastly underutilized community asset, and that's our chronically underemployed. And if we can build the conditions that will allow these basically invisible members of our community to participate in and benefit from the city's revival, then we have a sustainable long-term kind of economy. And I think this is such a more viable way to address issues of chronic poverty than, let's say, creating a ton of low-wage jobs or dumping cash into programs that just treat the symptoms of poverty without actually addressing the core causes of it. And tonight, I want to tell you the story about how I started to think about this kind of stuff by becoming, well, a farmer. About 7 years ago, I decided to turn my focus onto trying to help rekindle the Newark economy. My plan, if you could call it that, was to start a business, any business really, that was environmentally friendly and provided living wage jobs to the chronically underemployed. I wanted to test a model that a for-profit business could be engaged in environmental and human repair and be profitable at the same time because of how it did business, not in spite of it. So my original crew, which was made up primarily of formerly incarcerated men and women, and I started working in areas of urban agriculture. We built a couple of community gardens, and we experimented with vertical farming, and somehow we found ourselves starting a fulfillment center where we're making terrariums and decorating tabletop Christmas trees for sale at Brookstone. It was exciting to be up and running, but almost immediately, we hit an obstacle that I just did not see coming. And that was the majority of our employees came to work every day without the skills necessary to navigate the workplace challenges and responsibilities. And I think that was because so many of them were missing the support systems that so many of us take for granted. Systems that provide things like good education and healthful and plentiful food, and even the expectation of safety. Take, for example, one of our long-time employees, James. James always says that at 38 years old, this is his first real job. James started dealing in the streets of Newark around the age of 12 and therefore was in and out of jail for many years. And so despite James's off-the-charts charm, intelligence, drive, because of his background, it's unlikely that someone like James could just jump into the workforce and thrive no matter how much money he was making. And a lot of our early employees, most of whom aren't with the company anymore, and sadly because a lot of them are back in prison, getting this job wasn't enough to arm them to take on the challenges that they faced every day. And I started to see that a paycheck and respect was only the very beginning of a long journey to repair. So about a year into our work, we were looking for other areas of agriculture to pursue, and we came to learn that one of the earliest industries in Newark was hard apple cider. Newark cider was beloved by the likes of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and it was so good that in great Jersey fashion, it was relabeled as champagne and sold on the black market as such, which I just love that Jersey's been Jersey forever. So with this kind of new information in hand, we decided to start the company all over again. but we really felt this was the perfect space for us. It was a business born of place. It was an opportunity to create a lot of jobs, and it was a chance to build a brand that was kind of really rooted in Jersey pride. But New Jersey law said that we needed to do cider production like wine. We needed to be part of a farm activity on, an actual agricultural operation. So we started to look in and around Newark for a viable site. This may come as a surprise to a lot of you, but there's not a ton of farmland available in Newark right now. But we found a 108-acre farm just about 45 minutes from the city. And although this was a huge step for us and it was costly and high risk, it really felt like the kind of place where we could kind of build our business around the notions of renewal and healing that we wanted to take on, both for the people involved and the environment that we all share. And to that end, we decided to manage our orchards, our apple orchards, with a form of agriculture known as regenerative agriculture. It's basically a philosophy that talks about increasing the biodiversity on the farm and providing nutrients to the organisms that live in the soil. In short, it's this idea of farming with nature, not against it. So after purchasing the farm, not too long thereafter, we came to discover that our soils were really damaged from years of poor farming practices and neglect. And it was going to take seasons to increase the nutrients in the soil. But ignoring the advice of wiser, experienced orchardists, we decided to go ahead and plant 8,000 apple trees right away anyway. I just felt like we had to get our trees in the ground, we had to start making cider, and we had to employ as many people as we could as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, 3 years later, we had to face the fact that our trees were not doing well. They were really struggling, and many probably weren't going to live. And it was because we hadn't set them up for success. We hadn't built the conditions that would allow those trees to thrive. So at this point, we had really two choices. We could have pursued a traditional, conventional form of agriculture, which would have been about bringing in external inputs, like chemicals, just to kill whatever it was that was harming the trees, or we could stick to our regenerative agriculture beliefs. And where in regenerative agriculture, the farmer sees things like disease and predation as signs of a system out of balance. And the goal of the farmer is to bring that system back into balance. So after weeks of debating and talking to outside experts and actually listening to a couple of them this time, we decided to stick to our guns and pursue our focus of regenerative agriculture. But that meant that we had to rip out about 80% of the trees we had planted 3 years earlier. That's over 6,000 trees that our crew had planted by hand after having cleared tons of rocks and dug the holes to put the trees in and hand watered and pruned those trees for over 3 years. And although this was a devastatingly difficult decision to make, we felt that if our goal was focused on the long-term health and well-being of the trees, we had to make that decision. And for me, it was when I started to see the parallels between a regenerative agriculture approach and my original goals in Newark. In regenerative agriculture, it starts with rebuilding what's in the ground, right? Those microscopic organisms that live in the soil. And as those invisible creatures get stronger, they start supporting the other organisms in the system. And the whole system gets stronger. And for us, that means we're spending the next 2 years replenishing the nutrients in the soil. We're planting wildflower meadows to attract beneficial insects, and we're constructing a system of ponds and swales to deal with stormwater runoff and soil erosion. And this is all in preparation for welcoming the new trees that we're going to plant to replace the ones that we took out last spring. And it's this idea of fostering an internal strength as opposed to building a farm that's dependent on outside inputs. So the interesting thing about this is this kind of resiliency that comes from farming this way, this kind of resiliency that will allow our trees to weather the storms and deal with future disease and predation. It's the same kind of resiliency that's necessary on the human repair side as well. Every one of us at the company, from me to our newest hire, has to continually work on building the skills necessary to meet our daily challenges. But just like in the orchards, that kind of personal growth can't be forced. But we can at least create the conditions that make that kind of growth possible. And to that end, we started a on-the-job soft skills training program to deal with things like identity value and emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. And I think the conflict resolution one's really handy these days. But it's this kind of program and a living wage that provides our team the personal skills and the financial tools they need to contribute more, and not just at work, but more important, within their own communities. And regenerative agriculture has taught us that the world is abundant, it's infinitely complex, and it's so beautifully interdependent, and that the health of a system is dependent on the health of all of the members of that system. And this applies in business building as well. If we all think that the solution to economic struggle is job creation, then we must build and support businesses that pay a living wage, and this is key, that they have central to their mission the regeneration and the rejuvenation of the communities in which they reside. These are the kind of businesses that understand that quarterly returns or short-term profits aren't the sole measures of success. These are the kind of businesses that understand that their profits come from the betterment of community, not at its expense. You know, James, that guy that I was talking about earlier, to me, he so beautifully personifies this idea of an individual's growth being so connected to the growth of those around him. Recently, we had a reporter who wanted to do a story on us, and she was interested in profiling James because he's really great at grafting apple trees. And grafting is a orcharding technique where you take a branch from a fruit tree and fuse it to a rootstock to create a tree. And I was sort of reluctant to ask James if he wanted to be in the article. I was like, I didn't want to make a spectacle of him as if he was like the poster child for the company or something. But I went ahead and asked him anyway. And James said, well, if she didn't use me in the story, how would my kids know that these are my trees? And the story came out, and it profiled James and his mad grafting skills. And sure enough, his 6-year-old son, little James, asked his dad to read him that article every night for months before he went to bed. And now James is committed to moving our tree nursery into Newark because he wants to create a program where he can teach teens how to graft trees and plant them in our parks and open spaces throughout the city. And the way he put it was, these kids would love to have their name on something like that. They need to have their name on something like that. And he continued to say that being part of something, feeling pride in their work, is the thing that these kids are missing most. And I can give them that because that's what I got out of this. And for me, you know, I've learned such a valuable lesson from James, both in his you know, desire to have his recognition, his contribution recognized, and his eagerness to empower the teens in his own community. And it's a lesson that I've learned from farming with nature and I guess farming with James. And that lesson is that in a healthy system, nothing and no one is wasted. And that applies whether we're talking about the biological life in the soil or we're talking about the chronically underemployed in Newark. And Newark's revival must be based on the increasing vitality of its community members. And I think for us to do that, we must first recognize that our destinies are so interconnected. And we have to embrace an idea that was attributed to the Australian Indigenous activist Leela Watson. If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us get to work together. Thank you.